welcome back to Bumblebee for today's video on the top 10 scandalous wedding traditions from Tudor, England. Tradition number 10 is you better afford it. If you wanted to get married, you had to have stacks on stacks, enough at least that they had the wherewithal to establish a household of their own. In Tudor times, contemporary opinion was against the marriage of people who had not yet built up the means to maintain a family or had little prospect of ever being able to do so. Marriage was explicitly for starting a family. So this restriction was for the church to weed out the people that were just trying to wed for love or intercourse, which were both considered sinful things. Because in Tudor England, either you get married for children or you're abstinent. That is it. So while still youngings, off the lower class and the poor went. Because if they wanted any prospect of marriage in the future, which for a girl your only role it was to breed and birth, so yeah, you kinda needed that prospect, then you had to leave home to find jobs or training. This was usually in the form of domestic servants, living in laborers or apprenticeships. And after having accumulated sufficient funds doing that would maintain a family, these lower middle class and poor individuals were able to make their own decisions regarding their choice of spouse, unlike the rich. So suck it. Also, because of how long it took for these low class people to earn the required marriage money, the median age for marriage amongst the poor was late 20s, meaning they were also more mentally mature and ready to be parents and experience physicality, unlike the royals and the nobility, who are wed and pregnant young without any working skills, independence, or financial understanding. AKA, it was worse to be rich and experience Tudor marriage than it was to be poor too. Tradition number 9 is rich versus poor. What a great way to integrate into the topic of how poor weddings were more for love, while rich marriages were for contract. The interest in marriage among the wealthy was of great importance because of the obvious. Controlling and arranging marriages was some form of exchange for property, titles, or other means of wealth. The reason men and women in middle and upper class ranks of society married as young as they did, in comparison to the poor marrying in mid or late 20s, was with the help of bequests or lifetime transfers of resources from a previous generation. Lower classes, as we know now, were not concerned with the custom of exchange, since contributions would be limited to just the money they can provide to get a home and start the family. The lack of economic leverage allowed marriages amongst the poor to reflect more of a personal affair, as it was more of their choice. After all, like said, it's either that or abstinence. Wealthier people would have their marriages arranged for them, and it involved a collective decision of families, relatives, and communities even. This was due to the concept of lineage and preservation of status, which emphasized increasing and transmitting inheritance from one generation to another. Sir William Locke is a great example, as he would only allow a prospective suitor to marry his daughter after providing his account books, which indicated his economic worth and value. Naturally, this led to the customary practice for noble families to sign contracts that betroth their children in advance, sometimes even before they're born. This ensures a suitable political match, not one of love, which was scandalous and against the church. However, these negotiations for marriage were not done in isolation. Tradition number 8 is mutual acceptance. So like I said, the nobility and the royal families started planning marriages for their heirs at an early stage. Look at the marriage of Prince Arthur and Catherine of Aragon, for example, which was agreed to between their parents when Arthur was 2 and Catherine was 3, but it takes place well over a decade later. But again, decisions couldn't be made in full isolation. The need to use marriages to strengthen alliances and secure the survival of a dynasty did not apply to the great majority of the population. Spouses were encouraged to love one another, but it was assumed that that would come after the wedding. It has to be built on mutual respect and friendship first, something royalty didn't really get the chance to do with arrangements, but commoners absolutely did. And so it came into play that the express consent of partners was necessary to make a valid marriage. Otherwise, a marriage wasn't able to take place, poor or rich. This means Catherine of Aragon could have grown up and told her parents and Arthur to shove it, and that she didn't consent. That marriage wouldn't have been able to legally happen if she had done that. Now, with old nobility, as we know, forcing consent wasn't something they shied away from, so many decided it was just easier to do what their parents wished. So let's talk about that next. Tradition number 7 7 is parental consent. The idea of consent was crucial to medieval and Tudor marriages, and if a person could later prove that the marriage had taken place without their consent, it could be annulled. However, the 5th commandment, which is honor thy father and mother, reinforced a social value that made many feel they had no choice but to accept marriage arrangements made by their parents. Once again, it sucks to be rich because this expectation was upheld even when a parent died. Look at Michael Wentworth, who in 1558 left behind a will saying that a significantly lower dowry would be provided to a disobedient daughter who was not advised by my executors but by their own fantastical brain. Now, of course, you may be wondering, there had to be some nobility and royals that went against the guilty biblical conscience and their parents' will. Of course there is. Not many, naturally, and plenty who did were killed, but not everyone. Thomas Tyne of Longleat and Maria Touchett married in secret in 1594 despite their fathers being bitter enemies. What about poor folks though, without arranged marriages? Well, their version of this was they needed their parents' consent to marry, the same way noble parents needed their children's consent to their marriages, like a weird flip around. You could go ahead and marry who you wanted, but some parents could react angrily if they're not consulted. When in 1520 Joan Stevens belatedly asked her parents on her knees for their consent to her marriage decision, her father reportedly only said, "Void harlot, out of my sight." There was also the Paston family, who went to extraordinary lengths to break up the marriage of their daughter who wed their steward. She was beaten, tormented, starved, but they still couldn't force her to revoke her consent to her marriage, even after the local bishop threatened her. Eventually, the family had to accept the match and content themselves with casting her off. Tradition number 6 is death dealings. So, it's in noblemen's wills how and who they want their offspring to marry. But what's in your partner's will? As a man, if your woman died, you suddenly had to take care of 13 children, 8 pigs, 3 sheep, a fuck ton of chickens and their eggs, plowing, cleaning, preparing food, making cheese, making clothes, cleaning clothes, repairing broken items. Man, the list goes on as to what these women were doing. But this was the way of the olden world. Life expectancy was shorter, especially for women thanks to birthing complications. Consequently, most people would have married several times for shorter periods. This happened the most amongst the upper classes since they married younger. 3 or 4 marriages in their lifetime was pretty normal. It was a tad more complicated for regal women to do this just because of that whole archaic stupid man need for his bride to be a virgin. But shit, if she's coming with a carriage full of cash and some regal titles from the last husband, I think it was a little easier to look past her having a bit of experience. Meanwhile, when a peasant woman died, her husband would generally marry again within literal weeks so that he could have help running the home and caring for children. Commoner women would marry again out of pure societal expectation. Being a widower was acceptable to the church because it showed loyalty to the first husband, but being a single mom meant no income, no sense of security, no protection. So when it came time to remarry, you wanted to choose a man who knew what was up with your past and was cool with it. Hilariously, this was usually a colleague or apprentice of the former husband, and they'd keep the business going without him. Catherine Fenkel was the widow of a business owner in the Drapers Guild, and she did this. Tradition number 5 is on the thumb. Okay, so I figure first half we keep the more official stuff, now onto the sillier stuff. So it turns out, before the time of King Edward IV, which is around 1549, ladies actually wore their wedding rings on their left-hand thumb. The only reason this changed is because the Protestant church was trying to distinguish itself from the Catholics who placed the ring on the right-hand thumb, or middle finger. I'm not gonna give you guys the bird. In their new doctrine, they dictated that it would be the 4th finger on the left hand. 4th finger, of course, being for Edward IV. Since then, the majority, but not all, of Western European countries have worn rings on their left hand. England's colonization of everyone else spread this tradition to many parts of the globe. But another nice ring-related leaf to flip is how, before Mary Tudor, so 16th century, wedding rings were set with precious stones the way they are now. Mary abolished this practice because she liked all things that were bland and prudish. That, and she felt it was pagan to inlay precious gems in wedding rings, since the language of stones was an advent of Rome. Ruby indicated glory, emerald, tranquility and happiness, crystal, simplicity and purity, diamonds, invulnerable faith, sapphire, hope, onyx, sincerity, and amethyst, humility. But her restriction didn't stay out for long, and wedding rings inlaid with beautiful stones ripe with meaning circled back after she was gone. Tradition Tradition number 4 is superstitious clothing. I don't mean the wedding veil itself believes in conjuring spirits and crystal balls, obviously, but on the topic of veils, wouldn't you know it, but the Tudors picked up a little some from the Romans in believing veils have a mystic power that would disguise the bride's face from any evil spirits. Another tactic to prevent evil spirits at the wedding was all the men in attendance would wear the exact same color to confuse the evil spirits and maybe trying to find the groom. The biggest superstition, absolutely big, massive no, was a green dress. Remember, before Queen Victoria, nobody wed in white because it was impractical. It's only used to make diapers because it could be bleached. Marriage colors were usually silver or blue for nobility, and for a commoner was whatever they had on hand. But green was not only considered unlucky, being the color of jealousy, but also had implications. So shout out to my mom, who I know will see this, as she got married in the color green and will definitely get a kick out of this. So in Tudor times, to say a girl had a green gown also implied that she was of loose morals, because her dress would be grass stained due to rolling around in the fields. Hence the whole quip, marry in green, ashamed to be seen. So if you wore a green dress on your wedding day, Tudors thought not only was it bad luck, but it implicated you as a girl with no virtue. Tradition number 3 is dragon feet. You know that tradition that they used to have of tying old shoes to the back of a couple's car when they're driving away? It was replaced by cans, then streamers. Now it's just paper signs with the happy couple's PayPal information on it asking for cashola. Well, that stinky, yet albeit kinda cute tradition came from Tudor times, but it had evolved a lot since then to end up on the back of a car. Because in Tudor times, guests would take off and throw their shoes at the bride and groom as they walked down the aisle together, with great luck being bestowed on them if they were hit. I wonder if the amount of luck they got was like a point system, so if you nail the bride in the head with the shoe, it's like plus 50 luck points, while if it's like a leg or a hand, it would be like plus 5 luck points, but whatever. Tradition number 2 is the cake smash. What a perfect time to bring this up, since people are so bored online nowadays that the conversation of grooms and brides mushing cake into each other's faces is now a hot button topic. There's been a lot of conversations about how the intent behind how hard you ram a slice of carrot cake in your newlywed's face may not always be joyous, especially with bridal makeup being anywhere between free and tens of thousands of dollars. Doubt me? Google it, folks. We have women paying over $10K for natural glam makeup. But the cake smash tradition does come from a good place, even if it wasn't a good time period. The Tudors' wedding cake was originally tiny glazed wheat cakes that fit into the palm of your hand. These little cakes would be broken over top, not against, but over top, the bride's head by family, friends, and guests to bestow good luck and fertility, as wheat came from the fields she would soon harvest and produce goods from to support her family. Tradition number 1 is escaping paradise, i.e. divorce, which did not exist as a concept before Reformation. If you didn't want to be married to your spouse anymore, you had to tough that shit out or just prove the marriage had never been valid in the first place. Remember Catherine of Aragon, aforementioned having been contracted to wed Arthur Tudor while they're both still tots? Well, Arthur dropped and she became Henry VIII's first wife, but he didn't want her anymore once he met Anne Boleyn, who would accept no less than marriage from Henry if he wanted to better, and Henry really wanted to better. So he in turn went to the Pope and begged on bended knee to have an annulment from Catherine on the basis she had been married to his brother before him and he inherited her with the throne like an old worn out ottoman. However, the Pope knew in Henry's case he was only doing this to get under Anne's 46 layers of skirts, so he specifically was denied then. However, there was quite a few grounds that the average person could use to attempt divorce, such as lack of consent to the marriage. So if you guys didn't do the whole verbal thing, but just did the church wedding alone, locked and loaded, you got your divorce. Another was a pre-contract by one party to someone else. And then of course, non-consummation of the wedding. If you guys never banged, y'all were never married. Also, if you can somehow prove one or both of you were insane at the time of the marriage, you can slip on out of that one. And of course, you can always play some nasty little cards. For example, if a spouse joined the convent or the monastery, the other could remarry. So Louis XII of France used this to rid himself of his first wife and grab the heiress Anne of Brittany. Thank you for tuning into Bumblebee. I sure hope you enjoyed. Be sure to take some time to subscribe to the Hive. We have plenty of amazing hosts who know the most and are here to deliver you a good time. I will see you around.